Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show where I go over the week in politics that was and look ahead to the future. If you are new, please be sure to like the videos, and if you're a regular, please subscribe so that you get alerts as to when new episodes come out. If you were not aware, I was spent the last 2 weeks off. I was in Mexico sailing across the Gulf of America. I had a great trip. I wasn't gone the whole time, but I was gone for a good portion of it. This is a picture of me in Cozumel, Mexico, and I got stuck in the airport overnight. So here's a picture of the cancellation board around 11 p.m. and then a selfie of me at about 1 a.m. So we will be back. Well, only for 1 week, and the next week's episode, August the 24th, I will be away. So, just like Congress, I like to have my weeks off, my summers off as well. August anyway, August recess for me too, and we will be back on August 31st with regularly scheduled programming. And I hope you enjoyed the last 2 weeks videos. One was about media bias in politics, and the other was about political philosophers and how they shaped our world. As always, if that's the stuff you like, please let me know in the comments below. If you if you're ready, let's begin and let's cover some election news over the last few weeks, and I'll provide some of my latest midterm analysis, and then go right to Capitol Hill, and then to an executive order that President Trump signed regarding vaccines. So we will begin with Abdul El Sayed's win in the Michigan primary a few weeks ago. He won by a narrow margin over his centrist opponent, Representative Haley Stevens. It appears the party is now unified in Michigan. He will face former Representative Mike Rogers. This, I think, was a big mistake for Democrats. Regardless, though, it was a big win for El Sayed. Not necessarily in terms of margin, because it was only by about 1%, but it was big in terms of its impact. And there could potentially be a progressive senator from a swing state, which I believe would be the first time in a long time, if not ever. Stevens was heavily supported by AIPAC, and in fact, she got nearly $30 million. And her support from Israel, from AIPAC, and her support from Israel is probably what cost her the race. Now, I've made my views known on people who vote only on one issue, whether that's abortion or marijuana or taxation or Israel in this case, known before. I will just say that it is good to have diverse viewpoints regarding Israel in Congress. However, this alone will not change the arithmetic. If there's anyone out there thinking that things will change after this, really it will not. There might be a little bit more friction than there was before, but both parties are still broadly pro-Israel and probably will be in the short and medium term. So in terms of policy, he's a big person on Medicare for all, a wealth tax on billionaires, ending unconditional support for Israel. He wants to change or abolish ICE. And there's not a whole lot in here, I think, that would repulse swing voters. Maybe Medicare for all, depending on the individual, and probably abolishing ICE, that could be unpopular. In a state like Michigan, maybe not. If it was like Arizona, I would say he would be done, but this could work. I don't see a whole lot, as I said, that would repulse swing voters. This is a blue year, as we are expecting. Democrats with this kind of policy platform would probably win even in a swing state, and Michigan is a slightly leaning blue swing state, although it's still definitely a swing state. So he could still be vulnerable if he faced an election in 2032, which would be the next time he runs for re-election, because that's a presidential election year. If the Republican wins, nationally, he would probably lose his seat, which I would expect even if he was a centrist. If he had run last cycle in 2024, 2022, or 2020, he probably would have lost. So I would rate this as leans, maybe more like likely Democrat. A theme of the summer, as with Abdul El Sayed, has been progressives toppling establishment Democrats in their primaries. Peggy Flanagan, for example, won her primary in Minnesota to be the next senator for Minnesota, replacing retiring Tina Smith. In New York City, Representative, I believe it's the city, Adriano Espaillat was defeated in his primary. Colorado had some Democratic wins, progressive wins. Maine, there was Graham Plattner, of course, and then more. However, there is a limit. I wondered when were we going to get to the limit, and it turns out we have reached the limit. The progressive running to be governor of Wisconsin, she was narrowly defeated by the moderate in the race, Francesca Hong. She was the progressive. She lost in a race that was clearly she should have won because her opponents kind of melted away. Her big opponent, Mandela Barnes, he had to drop out of the race. And then the guy who eventually won, Crowley, actually did drop out of the race and then he returned. So a lot of the mail ballots were not, people didn't vote for him because they had already voted because he had already left the race. So the vote was really split in many ways, and neither who won. Crowley got about 40% of the vote, or Hong, she got less than 40% of the vote. So it was a very split field. And what were her policies? Well, she at one point she wanted to defund the police, and if you ask me if you want to defund the police, you are a radical. So she wanted to defund the police. She wanted to add a new state income tax for people making over $750,000 a year, and that would have driven people away from the state. It would have bankrupted the state, guaranteed. She wanted to abolish ICE, which of course she couldn't do as the governor of a state, but that's something she would have made Wisconsin a sanctuary state. And then she also wanted to get rid of Valentine's Day, the 4th of July, and Thanksgiving, saying that Thanksgiving is a colonizer holiday. And by the way, in her defense, I don't like Valentine's Day or Thanksgiving, so I would happily vote for any politician promising to abolish them, not that they actually have the power to do it. But then she was asked what her favorite holiday was, and she said it was Thanksgiving as a joke. So that had no support for her after that. So if she had won, I would have said this race was likely Republican, but and I would have said Democrats are toast, but she didn't, and that's great. So Democrats will probably win this race unless some crazy scandal comes out. In Connecticut, Governor Ned Lamont, he survived the primary challenge. He won about 2/3 of the vote. He will move to the general election and he'll win a third term. In South Carolina, the special election primary to replace the late Lindsey Graham, that's going to run off. Looks like it's going to be Ralph Norman versus his sister, Graham's sister, Darlene, something Darlene Graham. And then next week we have Alaska, Florida, and Wyoming. And I would pay attention to Alaska. By next week, I mean this week, actually. It's next week as I'm recording this, but it's tomorrow, if you're listening to this when this video comes out. I would pay attention to Alaska just to see the level of support for Democrats versus Republicans, and the top 4 candidates will advance to runoff. So instead of it being Republicans run on one ballot, Democrats run on another ballot, and then in a general election it's one of each. Sort of like it is in California, where all the candidates run on one ballot, and then instead of like in California where the top 2 advance, it's going to be the top 4 advance, which I think is kind of stupid, but that's kind of the way it's going. And then in the general election, assuming you live in Alaska, you're going to get to rank your ballot. So you could pick 1, 2, 3, 4, and then whoever has the least amount of votes, they drop out, and it moves on to the next. It's actually, I think ranked choice voting is really great, and I wish it was nationwide. The problem is in a state like Alaska is they take forever to count their ballots, so it has to be counted multiple times, which makes it take even longer. So that's not necessarily going to be a problem now, but it will be on election night when we vote, when we're sitting around watching to see what happens. So that could be a problem. And there is actually a ballot initiative to repeal ranked choice voting. And if I was in Alaska, I would actually vote for it to repeal it, because Alaska just does not have the election infrastructure to actually count these ballots quick enough, and it takes weeks and weeks. So that will take us to the rest of the midterm map. I'll start with the House of Representatives. That's fairly easy. Democrats are almost certain to retake control of the House. Even though there was lots of Republican gerrymandering, it has been mostly canceled out by Democrats gerrymandering, and the few gains that they made will be wiped out by the blue wave. I would not expect a large majority for Democrats, but they should gain in and around a dozen seats. It could be a little bit more, it could be a little bit less, but it should be enough to retake control. The Senate remains the most interesting, and I believe it's where people will be spending most of their attention on as we get closer and closer. So the National Democratic Party, the DNC, is completely broke. They have no money. And I don't think they have much cash on hand either. However, their individual candidates are performing quite well. And if I had to pick between the party doing well and the candidates doing badly versus the party doing badly and the candidates doing well, I would pick the candidates doing well, because they're actually on the ballot and they need that money to rally the troops to hit the streets for a general election campaign. In most of these important states, Democrats have far outraised Republicans. James Tallarico, for example, has raised over $50 million, and his opponent, Ken Paxton, has only a couple million. In Georgia, John Ossoff has over $30 million, while Mike Collins has only a couple million. Sherrod Brown has over almost $25 million, while Senator John Husted in Ohio has less than $7 million. In North Carolina, Roy Cooper has $16 million. His opponent has less than $6 million. In Michigan, Abdul El Sayed has $7 million, while Mike Rogers has $5 million. And in Iowa, the Republican is narrowly ahead. She has a couple $100,000 more than Democrat Josh Turek. So this is as of June 30th. This doesn't take into account the changes in candidates in Maine and the fact that the primary is now over in Michigan. So we'll get an updated number as of September 30th sometime in October, because they have to file each quarter. And then there'll be another one in December, but by then the election will be over. So Democrats are in a strong position, especially in states like Texas and Georgia, Alaska, North Carolina, and Ohio. Generic ballot polling shows Democrats are ahead anywhere from 5 to 6 on the very low end and 9 to 11 points on the high end. And at this point, if an election were held tomorrow on August the 18th, I would say that Democrats would probably win about 8% in the generic ballot, maybe 9%. And that would be enough to have a decent House majority. They probably would win a little bit more than a dozen seats, and they would probably win several Senate seats. I don't know if they would take control, because that would depend more on the candidates and the states, but they would be in a solid position to retake control of the whole of Congress. So out of these states, we have Texas, Alaska, North Carolina, Ohio, Maine, and Iowa. Democrats need to win 4 of those seats, and they need to hold all of their current seats. And except for Michigan, there's really is no reason to believe that they wouldn't. And as I said when we started talking about this about a year ago, and even almost 2 years ago, it is a tall order, and I am skeptical that they could actually do it. And I think it is possible. I believe the most likely outcome at the moment is where Democrats win in Maine, Alaska, and North Carolina, and they hold all of their seats, but they fall short in Texas, Ohio, and Iowa, as well as, I think I'm missing one, but you get the point. So that would make the Senate split 50-50. J.D. Vance would be the tie-breaking vote. So Republicans would retain control of the U.S. Senate, but there's still lots of swing voters in there. There's still Susan Collins would be defeated. There's still Lisa Murkowski. She is a swing voter, so Democrats could still get some of their stuff through. And there is Tallarico in terms of Texas. That would probably be their next best opportunity. He's doing decently well in some polls, most recently in a poll by Texas A&M. There's a YouGov poll as well on Fox News. They're not really the best pollsters, but the betting markets show this race getting closer and closer as time goes on. So things could actually flip if it does get better. This is kind of where things are at on August 17, 2026. We're less than 3 months out from the midterm elections, and we will have a few more quiet weeks until the GOP convention in Dallas, which is next month. And as a reminder, Democrats are not holding a convention this year, which is usually what they do. They usually don't hold a convention. Neither party usually holds a convention during a midterm election year. But Democrats are not holding it because, once again, they are broke. So the Republican National Campaign will be firing, I expect it to be firing on all cylinders after the convention on September 9th and 10th, which I think is way too late, but that's what's going on. So things could happen in 2 directions after that, and I'll explain both and kind of explain what I think is going to happen. The very first direction is a more conventional, traditional presidential election wisdom, and that is that they'll hold their convention, and then the GOP will see a bump in the polls, and then the polls they'll fall down, and then you'll see a narrowing in the polls as they start to roar their campaign to life. And I don't think that's actually going to happen. I think what's more likely is that the polls are not going to move at all, and in fact, they might move the other way, and that the Democrats will actually gain over their opponents. The most likely option is that there's no movement at all, and I would say that because the goal of the convention is to raise a lot of money and to show off their candidates. And since Trump is involved, Trump will want to be the star of the show, as he was in the last 3 conventions. The problem is Trump is not a popular politician, never has been, so using him as the showman will only energize their base, if it even does that. And their candidates themselves, if they're not going to show off Trump and they're going to show off their candidates are not very good. I mean, Ken Paxton's loved by the base, but not by swing voters. And then there's Mike Rogers. He's a dud. I don't even think the base likes him. So John Husted, he's all right, I guess. Dan Sullivan, Michael Wheatley, Ashley Hinson in Iowa might be a star, and that might be the one seat they actually win. But it's still not that great. And they're facing big beasts of the Democratic Party like Abdul El Sayed, James Tallarico, more recently, until recently, Graham Plattner, but now Troy Jackson. And then you also have Jon Ossoff could run for president one day. So they're facing these very big beasts of the party, and they're not very big names. I mean, we all know national names. Like, we know who John Ossoff is. We know who James Tallarico is. We know who we knew who Graham Plattner was, but we don't know really anything. I can't even tell you if you put a bunch of pictures of these Republican politicians and you ask me to name them, I would have no idea who they are. And I follow this because I do this show. So that's usually a bad sign. And then as for the money, that might be the only thing that they actually benefit from doing this. But as I've explained before, the MAGA Inc. PAC has $300 million in the bank and they haven't used it. And then if you go in the last 40 years of Republican presidential midterms, so you think in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and then most recently this midterm, if you go all the way back, Democrats have had less money than Republicans in every single midterm in terms of the national party, and Democrats still did very well in every midterm except 2002, where they either gained control of a chamber or they dramatically expanded their majority in a chamber. And 2002 was an exception because of the attacks on September 11th, 2001. So the money alone, I don't think is going to be enough to actually change anything. And then the one last thing regarding this, and I explained this before, and it's that we live in a very polarized world, obviously. There are very few swing voters left undecided about who to vote for, and that's we're only, especially only 80 days before Election Day. I think many of the swing voters who could have been swung were actually swung last year or even before. So it's really, Republicans are probably realize this and they know they're not popular with their base, or at least they'd be smart if they knew that. So they're, or with, not with their base, with swing voters, and they'd be smart if they knew that. So they're probably, as I've said many times already, that they're going to run a base campaign. This, I believe, will be a very much like a presidential election, where it will be a largely national campaign about President Trump, and it will be a referendum on his leadership over the last 18 months. And considering that the party in Congress has been up to their ears in scandals, I mean, it's absolutely insane. Chuck Edwards, Tony Gonzalez, Max Miller, most recently Corey Mills, and he's not, this guy's not in Congress, Ken Paxton, but still very notable. That they have all added to the perception of Republican sleaze. And if you go back to 2006, which I think is the most comparable year to this year, there's Tom DeLay. There was lots of other people. There was sexting going on with minors among Republicans. I don't even think I'm allowed to say this on YouTube, but here I am. So there's a general idea of Republican sleaze. And yes, Democrats have had their sleaze, like Sheila Shervilas McCormick, Eric Swalwell, and most recently Graham Plattner. But if you notice, none of them are in office or running for office anymore. So that kind of shows you the contrast, where Democrats dumped their dead weights, but Republicans still have them. Moving on, there is not much else going on in the country at the moment. If you go to Capitol Hill, the Senate left the week before last. They confirmed Todd Blanche to be the next Attorney General with a 50-49 vote. Two Republicans, one of which is Susan Collins, who's running for re-election. She voted against the nomination, and probably for political purposes. And the president's agenda remains very much derailed. We have the Save America Act, which we've talked about for the last 6 months, and that's dead in the water. That's not going anywhere. And then we have the budget resolution to fund the War Department, another $73 billion to fund the war in Iran. That's dead as well. The effort to raise the national debt limit, which has to be done whether Trump is president or not, that's also dead right now. There's a few $1 billion for farmers and reforming elections in states. I think if you pulled those out and had voted those separately, I think Democrats might support those, especially for the farmers. I'm not so sure about the elections. A lot of our elections infrastructure is over a decade and a half old and needs to be updated. So Democrats might actually support that, but it depends on what they're spending that money on. If they're spending that money on new voting machines and those voting machines are digital, then why would Republicans vote for it? Like, they would obviously be skeptical. Or if it's to expand mail-in ballot infrastructure, why would Republicans vote for that? So I'm not even sure if that could get through. And there's also the Clarity Act, which would regulate the crypto sector. Democrats currently oppose the bill because they want the more regulations barring elected officials from profiting off the industry, which is absolutely makes sense to me. Because the Trump administration has allegedly done that with crypto, among other things. The Senate did approve 90-6 a bill to avoid federal government shutdown on September the 30th. This would extend current government funding until December 11th, 2026, but it is a different bill from what the House passed. So the House, when the House passes a bill and the Senate passes a bill, and they're different bills, they need to be reconciled, and then they need to be passed by both chambers again before it goes to the president for a signature. And because there is an election this year, I really don't think either Republicans or Democrats are going to shut down the government in October. I think what's more likely is that Democrats will take control of either one or both chambers in November, and then Republicans and Democrats are going to have during the lame duck session. They're gonna hit, and they're not gonna be able to get something done, and they're gonna smash heads, and then there will be a government shutdown in and around December 11th. It might be a little bit later. So, shifting to the White House, this is already getting a long episode, my bad. On Monday, last week, we had some big news regarding childhood vaccinations. Before we go on, I am not a medical expert, never have been, probably never will be. So definitely don't take medical advice from me, but we're just going to talk about the executive order and what some of the health scientists and doctors have said about it. Most controversially, the executive order splits the MMR vaccine. This was at the behest of RFK Jr., which until very recently, well, he has flip-flopped back and forth on the MMR vaccine. At one point, he said no vaccine was safe and effective. Then on an interview with Dana Bash on CNN, he said the MMR vaccine was safe and effective. This was only 2.5 weeks ago. And then last week, he said that the vaccine needed to be broken up. So now it's supposed to be in 3 different shots. And if you're not in the know, MMR is measles, mumps, and rubella. And it's 3 separate doses. It was put into 1 shot. So now they want 3 separate doses and 3 separate doctor's visits, which of course makes it possible that families might only get 1 or 2 or maybe none. So it also removes the federal recommendations for COVID-19 vaccines, which I think is probably a good idea. It also removes it for influenza, which is probably not a good idea, especially for children. And then for hepatitis B, that's also probably not a good idea. And it overall shrinks the recommended number of vaccines from 18 down to 11. This order is only a guidance because states do decide vaccine requirements, especially for schools, not the federal government. One thing I will say, though, in defense of the administration is that in the bygone days of the 70s and 80s, even the 60s, there were way fewer vaccines required, and we were a much healthier country. I'm not saying that the vaccines are making us sicker. That's something that RFK would say, but what I am saying is that it doesn't seem like it's actually helping us. And this is something that makes me think that Big Pharma is pushing these for political and money purposes. And Democrats would have agreed this in 2019. I remember Cory Booker, he ran for president in 2019, railing against Big Pharma. This was before COVID, and then obviously after COVID, everything changed. So then let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that would be RFK Jr. himself. The executive order does not have autism in the text. However, we know this is about autism because Trump stated that, quote, decades ago, children received only a small fraction of the vaccines required today. In those times, people were much healthier. And of course, the high rates of autism now observed do not exist. There's also a reason for such epidemic rates of autism, and that we're going to bring it back to much closer to where it actually was. So I'm not going to spend any time talking about vaccines and autism because I've actually done that already. There's a link in the description to a previous video I've done, and it's on YouTube now. And I actually brought RFK Jr., wink wink, to the show to explain some of his beliefs to us. And I recommend you check it out. It starts with where the vaccines cause autism thing, where that began, how it was disproved, and kind of where things are at now. And then it also talks about how the Tylenol, how at the time was being linked toward autism for no apparent reason. I recommend you check that out. I recommend everybody check that out, no matter what. Even if you know for sure, you know the whole story, I would still recommend you check it out and share it with your family and friends. Needless to say, this will cause further damage to public health, as we will all pay for it with sicker children and sicker winters, and ultimately a sicker society. And lastly, with the report, we got a report on August the 8th, this was over a week ago now, from Hunter Biden, that his father is declining and that his cancer is getting worse. This is deeply ironic from the man who assured us that he could still be president until 2029. It was also the man in 2019 who said that he could cure cancer when he became president, and apparently he will be releasing a new book, which I will not be reading, and I encourage nobody to read it, called Promise Me America, after the midterms. And obviously, I'm not happy that he's going to die soon. I'm not a monster, but for a man who inflicted serious pain on this country for 4 years and longer, if you consider his time in the Senate, especially with his crime bills, which I actually think were good, but most people don't, in the 90s. I mean, the pain that he inflicted on this country and the damage he did was immense. So it is very hard to feel any sorrow for him. And when he does die, whether that's next week or next month or next year or 10 years from now, we're going to have to sit through weeks of praise from Democrats during his funeral. And if it happens while Trump is president in the next 3 years, which I think is possible, I'm not going to say it's likely, I think it's definitely possible, the politics of it is going to be hilarious indeed, because we're going to have to see Trump either attack Biden, uh, praise him, either pretend or not, or say nothing at all. So either way, that's going to be worth watching. Once again, as a reminder, next week we will have another episode. We will return to regular episodes on August the 31st, and then it should be a pretty clear runway into the midterms in early November. And I'm going to be providing my thoughts next week on the political science major and what that is like, and I think it's very timely considering many students are going to college or going back to college. So that is all for now. As always, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.